few more seconds. Few more seconds. Okay, we're live.
Very good. I'd like to call the meeting to order. Welcome to tonight's session of the Oxford, Ohio Board of Zoning Appeals. Tonight's meeting is being held virtually under authority of the Ohio House Bill 197 and in compliance with the Ohio Open Meetings Act. Ben Mazur, do you want to do a roll call of the board members for us, please?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Schnipper. I'll start with Mr. Allison, please.
I'm here.
Mr. Heisman,
Here.
Ms. Rumanier,
Here.
Mr. Ames,
I am here.
and Mr. Schnipper.
Here.
Thank you.
First item on the agenda is we need an approval of the minutes from the September 16, 2020 meeting. Are there any additions, deletions, or corrections to those minutes? Board members?
None.
Kate, you got anything?
I move approval.
I've got a couple of very minor corrections. On page 3, about halfway down under decision criteria B, third sentence is it's saying nothing the neighbor's position that it was substantial. That should be noting, N-O-T-I-N-G.
Good catch.
And then on page 5, at the very final paragraph, could use a semicolon or something here. It says other requirements met eliminates a non-conforming lodging house. Maybe it could read other requirements met with a semicolon. Anybody else have anything?
I was an accounting major, not an English major.
Yeah. All right. As amended, is there a motion to approve the minutes?
I so move.
Thank you, Dan. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Ms. Rumanier. Any opposition to the approval of the minutes as amended?
No.
Without opposition, the minutes are then approved. We have two cases to hear tonight. The first is BZA case 2020-09 for 420 North Campus, seeking a variance to section 1143.05C for maximum lot coverage. Is there a motion from a board member to enter into an adjudication hearing?
So moved.
Thank you, Roger. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Dan. Any opposition? Without opposition, we're now in adjudication. Zach, are you going to present for the city?
Yes, I will.
Please identify yourself for the record,
Zachary Moore, planner for the city of Oxford.
and please raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth in matters before this board?
I do.
Please proceed.
Thank you very much. I will go ahead and share my screen for everyone. Okay, just holler out at me if you can't see my screen. All right. So we begin tonight with BZA-2020-09 for lot coverage at 420 North Campus Avenue. The applicant is Scott Webb Architect. The property owner who is joining us tonight, Paul Errol and Stephanie Frankowitz. The current zoning classification for the property is R3MS, single, 2, and 3 family mile square residential district. The current use is a duplex, a 2-family dwelling. And the proposal is a variance to section 1143.07C for maximum lot coverage. And here is a location map showing the subject property location. This is north of Sycamore and south of Homestead Avenue. So one property away from that junction there. And then here's showing the zoning classification. Pretty much all the properties within the vicinity are the same zoning classification of R3MS. And here is a bird's eye view looking to the west. So you can see the two units there, 420 and 422. There's 424 North Campus to the north and 416 North Campus to the south, which are single families. And here's another view looking to the north. So you can see it's a kind of a elongated building that stretches back to the back of the lot there. There's also a gravel parking area that is basically straddling the property line between 420 and 416. And you'll see photos of that here in a minute. Right here. So there is a concrete drive that's existing that comes off of North Campus. The concrete stops. You can see in the photos where that stops, and then it transitions into a gravel area. There's still a little bit of concrete that's along the building here, but otherwise the gravel tends to be used for parking at present. This is actually looking over on the other property itself, the one to the south. So you can see the cars that are parked there. This car here is on the subject property. So the gravel kind of stretches around to the backside of the property on the west-hand side. There's two units, of course. There's a unit that is oriented up closer to North Campus, and this is the front door to that unit. And then there is another unit in the rear. So the relevant zoning provision is section 1143.07C, which provides the following. This is for lot coverage for lots with vehicular access from a public street. We have separate standards that deal with lots that have an alley adjoining to them. Because this lot doesn't have an alley adjoining to them, they follow different standards. So the lot total percentage is 45% maximum for a lot. So that's the standard that we're dealing with this request. And I apologize, the figures in my report are actually different from the ones when I went back to do the analysis again for putting together the presentation. I uncovered that my initial numbers were actually off. So I apologize for that. So please go off the numbers that I'm going to present to you in my presentation. Basically, the existing lot coverage is at 62.92%. So that is already exceeding 45%. So that's more or less a grandfathered condition of the property. And with their request, they're going up to 64.17% in coverage. So you can see here's the submitted site plan from the applicant. Basically what they want to do is they want to put a new covered porch on the front of the property. That's really the reason behind the request. There's not any proposal or any change to the structure itself in terms of affecting the number of units or adding an enclosed addition to either of the units or increasing occupancy or dealing with anything of that nature. It's really just an aesthetic improvement to the site, and in order to do so, they need the lot coverage to be recognized as a part of that. So looking at the existing conditions for the property, you can see the building footprint here that's highlighted in blue. Obviously, that's not changing. The paved areas total a little over 1,300 square feet. That's everything that is in kind of a brighter, more solid orange color. And then you can see the gravel area, which totals a little over 1,000 square feet. That is in the rear of the lot in kind of a lighter orange color. So what is changing as a result of that? Basically taking a little snippet out of the existing paved area, because there's a little stoop or a little concrete pad there that exists right beside the doorway. It's replacing that. It's taking that out of the equation and then adding in a new porch that totals 128 square feet. So you can see how that is adjusting the coverage from the 62.92% up to the 64.17% lot coverage. And here's the submitted rendering showing the porch design. This would bring it more closely in line with the district standards, which do encourage front porch additions to dwelling units in the district. So you can see there, a nice aesthetic improvement to the front of the home. Okay, and then I will just go through the decision criteria. And I've updated the tables to kind of make it a little handier, a little easier to kind of sift through staff's positions on the criteria. So hopefully that can be of benefit to the board. So beginning with criterion A, whether the property in question will yield reasonable return or whether there can be any beneficial use of the property without the variance. So the property is currently developed with a two-family dwelling, which is sufficient evidence to demonstrate there is beneficial use. So the goal, of course, in seeking this variance is merely to improve the aesthetic presentation of the structure. So because it's not dealing with the use aspect, we find that criterion A does not lend support to the granting of the variance. Criterion B, whether the variance is substantial, and I will use the updated numbers for this response. So the applicant is asking for a 1.25% increase from the existing lot coverage. So despite the fact that the subject lot is already non-conforming by exceeding the normal coverage limit by 17.92%, staff does not believe the requested change is substantial in relation to the presently developed condition. So we believe this supports the variance. Criterion C, whether the essential character of the neighborhood would be substantially altered or whether adjoining properties would suffer a substantial detriment as a result of the variance. So we believe this proposal serves as an enhancement to the character of the surrounding neighborhood and does, as I said, bring it more in line with the district and with the mile square design guidelines. And this would not cause a detriment to surrounding properties. So we find that this criterion supports the request. Criterion D, whether the variance would adversely affect the delivery of governmental services, i.e. water, sewer, and garbage. We do not believe services will be adversely impacted. Engineering, fire, and police departments, they all return the application without comments. And of course, had we received any comments, these might have contributed. And there will be no impact to the actual indoor living space, as I mentioned, or additional required utility connections. So we feel that criterion D supports the variance request. Criterion E, whether the property owner purchased the property with knowledge of the zoning restriction. So the applicant indicates in his letter that the owner was informed about the restriction when initially contacting him about designing a new porch for the property. If the owner had no prior knowledge of the restriction, then this criterion would be found to provide additional support for granting the request. Criterion F, there's a lot to this one. We find that there's mixed evidence for this criterion. It's whether the property owner's predicament feasibly can be obviated through some method other than a variance. So past practice has been to allow owners the ability to make changes to their property so long as there is no change to the use and the net amount of coverage does not exceed the existing percentage, even if that figure already exceeds the district maximum. So we're talking about basically the grandfathered figure in terms of the existing lot coverage. So there's a little over 1,000 square feet of the current lot that's devoted to gravel parking, which in and of itself is a nonconformity with respect to the parking standards of the zoning code. So one way this could be obviated, the owner could offer to excavate and revert enough of the gravel surface back to green space to account for the new porch footprint without necessitating a variance. So under this option, staff would likely ask for at least a curbed concrete walk or barrier, maybe an extension of that existing kind of walkway that leads along the side of the home to prevent gravel from creeping back into the area that would be reverted back to being green space. But a potential downside to this approach would be the loss of additional turnaround space on the lot because, of course, this lot is sharing its parking area more or less with the property to the south. So this could pose as its own predicament if this was the option that was explored, and this would not come into play if the variance were granted. So staff finds that there is mixed evidence toward this criterion. Criterion G, whether the spirit and intent behind the zoning requirement would be observed and substantial justice done by granting the variance. So the spirit and intent behind the maximum lot coverage standards is to ensure adequate preservation of open and green spaces interspersed throughout all properties. Thus, you're avoiding a neighborhood condition that's characterized by an abundance of paved surfaces and building foundations. So we feel the spirit of the zoning requirement could be better served by pursuing an option which limits the lot to its already pre-existing grandfathered coverage rather than increasing what is already a non-conforming aspect of the property, despite the fact that the amount of increase is relatively insubstantial, as we found with criterion B. So for those reasons, we find that criterion G does not support the granting of the variance. And then finally, criterion H, per our code, allows us to consider any other relevant factor. And there is another relevant factor that we feel supports the variance, and that is that the R3 MS district is the only district in the zoning code that actually provides both a minimum and a maximum front yard setback standard. So the minimum standard is 15 feet and the maximum is 25 feet. So the site plan shows the existing building 31 feet away from the front lot line, which would make it presently non-conforming because it's past that maximum front yard setback. So by adding a new porch to the structure, you're actually shortening this distance to approximately 23.5 feet, and you're making the structure more conforming with respect to the setback. So for those reasons, we feel that there is this additional factor that does support the granting of the variance. And that concludes my report. I am happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Zach. Board members, do you have any questions for Zach?
I have one question for Zach.
Please go ahead.
Is lot coverage measured differently for paved and gravel?
It's measured exactly the same. Gravel, pavement, any surface that is not green or landscaped is counted towards the coverage.
Okay, so the gravel versus paved drive, I mean, I got your possible recommendation, but the gravel versus paved driveway issue is not about lot coverage. It's just about a strategy, maybe another strategy to avoid this lot coverage increase.
And what I could do is maybe better explain that with the actual site plan itself. So if you kind of envision, see this darker orange kind of rectangular shape here, if that were to be, extended outward and then all the gravel behind it was taken out and replaced with a grassy area, you can see visually that that would allow for, the footprint that they're anticipating up front. So there would be enough of a swap there where they could stay within their existing coverage percentage without needing a variance.
Okay. But that would, the driveway is L-shaped because that, where there's current gravel, where you said might be space, is currently does that connect up to Homestead Avenue? Or is it just a
It does not. I
turnaround
believe
space?
It did at one point, but the property to the north, I think they recently put in a new parking area, and there are some posts there that are shown. There's these little circular icons here. There's not a way to get up to Homestead Avenue presently. So this is
Okay.
more or less a way, and I don't know, maybe the applicant could speak as to whether there is any sort of shared agreement or easement between these two properties here. But basically, the way I look at this is, this property is contained by its existing boundaries. So if you were to drive a vehicle down this driveway and then want to turn around, you have this area to kind of back up into and then pull backward and then go forward in a forward motion back to the street. If you eliminate that area, then you eliminate that turnaround on the subject lot itself. It's not to say that somebody could use, the gravel that's down here to the south on the adjoining property, but it is crossing that property boundary.
Did that answer your question, Kate?
Yep, I did. Thanks a lot, Zach.
Okay, thank you, Zach. Any other board members have a question for Zach? Okay, if there's no other questions, Scott, are you going to be presenting?
I am.
Please state your name for the record.
Scott Webb, architect, and representing the applicants.
And raise your right hand for me, please. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth in matters before this board?
I do.
Thank you, sir. Please proceed.
So I didn't put together my own PowerPoint this evening after our last few visits together here. I think we all know what a great job Zach is doing, and a lot of what I would have been presenting tonight would have perhaps just been redundant. I honestly think this is just a fairly simple matter. I think Zach kind of made the point at the end of his presentation that this isn't a setback question. The biggest drawback we have when adding porches is running up against setback regulations. As Zach pointed out, because this building sits so far back, adding this porch actually brings us closer to the street and closer to compliance. As he pointed out, this doesn't affect density, parking in any way. I mean, if you were to suggest that some sort of an exchange of the 128 square feet would be necessary, that would essentially, as Zach pointed out, kind of affect the parking. We honestly feel that they're sort of unrelated. This is just an opportunity for the owner to improve the property. If you saw back through some of the previous slides, there's a funny little shed roof on this thing right now that kind of stretches over the side of the building. It's in your packet. It's on page 21 in your packet. You can kind of see what the front looks like currently, just that little sort of tacked on shed across the front there that obviously doesn't represent the mile square guidelines or anything that we would like to see down there. So, we feel it's a pretty simple matter. We wanted to make it small enough that it wasn't a big ask in terms of the variance, but functionally it would sort of replace that little piece of roof that's there right now, extending it out about 4 feet and putting some columns to hold it up instead of just sort of hanging it off the face of the building. So as I said, we're hoping not to lose or affect any of the current parking arrangements, or have to lose anything in the opportunity to improve this property. So we would appreciate your consideration and be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Thank you, Scott. Board members, you have any questions for Scott? Okay. Mr. Errol, I see that you're online this evening. Is there
Yes,
anything that you would like to add to this?
No, sir. I think it's been a great presentation. Interesting to see and hear about all the different aspects that are considered in making your decision in granting or disallowing a variance like this. Obviously our hope is that the variance change be granted. However, we do realize that there's a lot to consider. We're not looking to gain anything from this besides making another one of the properties in Oxford a more beautiful place to live.
Thank you, sir. Okay, board members, is there a motion to reconvene your regular meeting?
So moved.
Thank you, Roger. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you,
Second.
Chris. Any opposition? Without opposition, we're back in regular session. Board members, discussion or a motion, please.
I
Well,
have no question, but I'll make a motion.
Well, go ahead.
In the matter of BZA 2020-09, looking at the variance for, okay, where's my number? 114307.07C, maximum lot coverage. I move that we grant the variance based on the criteria B. It is not substantial at 1.25% increase over a grandfathered situation. Criterion C, the essential character of the neighborhood would not be substantially altered. I actually believe it will be increased by making the building more in conformity than it was and more parallel on line with the neighboring buildings. Criterion E, the property owner was informed when he was talking to Mr. Webb about it, and he properly came forward to us. And criterion H, the other relevant factors being that it's bringing it closer into compliance with what was the original plan.
Thank you, Roger. Is there a second from a board member?
I'll second.
Thank you, Kate. Moved and seconded. Zach, are you going to do the roll call or is Ben?
I'm happy to do it if you'd like, Zach.
Yes, please.
Okay. I'll start with Mr. Allison, please.
Yes.
Mr. Heisman,
Yes.
Ms. Rumanier,
Yes.
Mr. Ames,
Yes.
and Mr. Schnipper.
Yes. Motion carries 5-0. The variance is granted. We have another case to hear this evening. It is case BZA 2020-10. The applicant address is 114 East Withrow, and they're seeking 3 variances for total lot coverage, front yard coverage, and more than 1 parking space in the front yard. Zach, you're going to present again, I presume?
Yes, I will.
Please state your name and title for the record,
Zachary Moore, planner for the city of Oxford.
and please raise your right hand. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth in matters before this board?
I do.
Please proceed.
Thank you very much. I'll go ahead and share my next presentation with everyone. Okay. So the details on this one, this property at 114 East Withrow, the applicant is again Scott Webb Architect, who's with us tonight. The property owners are Shane and Christiane Kaufman. The current zoning classification is the RO Office Residential District. This is basically a transition district between our UP Uptown zone, which is a mixed-use zone that allows for commercial and residential, and RO is a transitionary zone between that and our RMS districts, which are more purely residential districts. So the RO does allow for single family and 2-family residential, but it also allows for limited business and institutional type uses like offices and nonprofits, things of that nature. The current use, it's a vacant alley lot that is next to a 3-family dwelling property that is also owned by the same property owner, and that's to the south of the subject property, which I'll show you here in a moment. And the proposal, as Mr. Chairman has pointed out, there's 3 different variances that are being requested. There's section 114309C4B1 for total lot coverage, 114309C4B3 for front yard coverage, and 114904A1 for more than 1 parking space in a front yard. Here is the location map showing where the subject property is located. So this building over here, this is the McCulloch-Hyde Hospital, and this is their parking area that is across North Poplar Street. This is all zoned UP Uptown, which I'll show you here in a minute, of course. And then this property here to the south, this is 116 East Withrow, which is also owned by the same property owner. And you can see East Withrow Street is down here to the south. So if this subject lot were developed with a new single family dwelling as the applicant proposes, it would receive the address of 114 East Withrow. And if we go to the next slide, you can see the zoning classification. So there's more of a varied appearance here to the zoning map. You've got UP zone, as I already mentioned. You've got the R3MS district to the north in the orange color. There's the RO district, which kind of wraps around the eastern side of the parking area, and this is actually the northern extent of it. And then off to the east, there's the R2MS district, which is 2-family, which is, of course, less dense than the R3, which allows for up to 3-family. But just like the R2MS, the RO zone also allows for single family and 2-family uses as a permitted use. Okay, and here's a bird's eye view, so you can take a look here at the property numbers. So again, here's the McCulloch-Hyde Hospital parking lot, 116 East Withrow. So this is an alley lot. It does not border a public street. It in fact borders 2 different alleys, one that runs north and south and another that runs east and west. I don't believe that either of these alleys has a name, thus the reason why we're proposing an address off of East Withrow, which is the closest public street to the property. And here's a view looking to the west and then to the south. So, and then in the next couple of slides, you'll see some site photos here. So presently, this is basically a gravel lot, and it serves more or less as a de facto sort of parking area for the existing building at 116 East Withrow, which is a 3-family dwelling, which is actually non-conforming when it comes to the RO district, because it is 3 units instead of being 1 or 2. But it is a pre-existing legal grandfathered non-conforming use that exists there on the property. This is the north-south alley that's off to the west of the property. So you can see there's some hedges, there's a utility pole, and there's a stone wall that exists there. So basically, this alley is going on a downward slope as it goes from south to north, and then it eventually joins up with the gravel area here. But by the time it joins up with the gravel, it is past the property line between 116 and 114. So as you'll see here in a minute, when I show you the submitted site plan, part of the lot coverage issue has to do with ensuring that that connectivity remains to the back area of 116, which has some rear loading garages there in the back that will still need to be accessed. So there still will need to be a way to get vehicles back in there to that back area. So the way to ensure that while still developing this subject lot is to have a driveway, a new concrete driveway, one that has a material that is consistent with the zoning code, because of course gravel presently is not a conforming aspect, a conforming material. So the desire is to put a paved driveway in that will lead down into this 116 property. So the relevant zoning provisions we'll start with 114309, which is the RO district section of the code. So in C4B, it provides the following. This is for lots with vehicular access from a rear side alley and no access from a public street. So the relevant standards, the lot total is a maximum of 40%, and the front yard total is a maximum of 5%. And the proposed percentages, so it's 43.2% for the lot total coverage, which of course is only 3.2% greater than the limit. So not too far off there. The front yard standard is a little bit more, it's at 33.9%. And then the final section that we're dealing with for our third variance, that comes out of the parking code in 1149. So in 0.04A1, it provides the following. It says 1 parking space may be located in a required front yard, and all the other parking spaces that are required that are provided in excess of the minimum shall not be located in the required front yard. So we're dealing with a standard that says you can only have 1 parking space in the front yard. And of course, as you'll see here in a minute, they are showing 2 spaces within the front yard area directly off the alleyway on the northern side, the one that runs east-west. So here's the site plan. So you can see there's the 2 parking spaces that fall within the 20-foot front yard setback area in this location. There's also an additional sidewalk leading up to kind of the front porch for this new single family. And then there's a curved access drive that connects down to 116. So looking at the total lot coverage first, so this is looking at everything that's considered coverage on the entire lot. So you can see the various features. You've got the building footprint in blue, and then other paved surface areas that they're proposing split up between 1, 2, and 3. That adds up to a total lot coverage of a little over 1,700 square feet. And then you divide that by the total square footage of the lot, which is a little over 4,000 square feet. You get the proposed coverage percentage at 43.2%. And something to mention about the lot size itself. So in the RO district, the minimum lot size for a single family is actually 5,000 square feet. So it doesn't meet the district minimum lot area standard. However, and you may remember this provision from other cases, we have a section in our nonconformities code that talks about pre-existing lots of record that don't meet the minimum lot area standard. As long as you have one of those lots that has at least 3,000 square feet and at least 33 feet of lot width, you are basically guaranteed a single family dwelling as a permitted use on that property. and that is to ensure that there is at least some economic value that can be reaped from a pre-existing lot of record. So a single-family use is a permitted use for this lot as recognized by that provision in our nonconformities code. Just want to make sure that was clear for everyone. Turning now to the front yard lot coverage. So you can see the front yard outlined in red, and that totals a little over 2,100 square feet. So you would take the 3 different paved areas, adding them together and dividing them by that total front yard area. That gives you the percentage that they're requesting. And then here's the submitted rendering. So they're more or less tucking that building back to observe the front yard setbacks, which are observed from the alley, which is different than how it would normally be observed from a standard frontage lot that has frontage on a public street and then maybe an alley to the side or to the rear. These front yard setback standards typically apply to more of a standard frontage lot situation, not so much to an alley lot situation. But as you can see, they're meeting those setbacks and tucking the building back into the corner of the lot. Okay, and now I'm going to go through the decision criteria. So I'll begin with criterion A, whether the property in question will yield reasonable return, whether there can be any beneficial use. We feel that this criterion supports the variance. The property is undeveloped, thus it currently does not provide a return for the owner. Because the lot size predates the minimum area required by the current standards, as I went over, the nonconformities chapter kicks in and provides for at least a single family dwelling use. It would be difficult for the applicant to demonstrate compliance with the coverage and parking standards to achieve beneficial use of the property without the requested variances. So you're considering, again, as you always would with any area variance that we consider, whether there is practical difficulty that is demonstrated that warrants the need to grant the request. Criterion B, whether the variance is substantial. We feel this supports the variance. We do not believe a 3.2% increase in the overall lot coverage is substantial. But looking to the front yard coverage increase, which is more substantial on its face, going from 5% to 33.9%. Again, as I already kind of stressed, the front yard coverage, this is normally applied to lawn areas that are facing directly out onto a public street. The character along alleyways tends to be more developed in nature, less of an emphasis on preserving open spaces directly adjoining to the alleys. You have garages, you have parking directly off alleys and so forth. For standard frontage lots, parking spaces are allowed by right across nearly the entire lot line, just saving for setbacks on either side to observe the side lot line setbacks, which are 3 feet. And this is something we allow by right from alleys where it's a standard frontage lot and it's not a front yard. So you can have, in the case of a single family, you can have 2 spaces in a manner similar to what's shown on the subject site plan. You could have that without needing a variance. So for these reasons, when it comes to the front yard coverage, we don't believe that this is a substantial request in regard to what we already see with other lots that get developed in a similar manner. Criterion C, whether the essential character of the neighborhood would be substantially altered or whether adjoining properties would suffer a detriment. So the neighborhood is characterized by an abundance of residential housing that is primarily intended to serve student tenants in proximity to campus. This isn't technically part of the 2017 rezoning area, but it does adjoin that area. So it's more or less part of the same side of town, if you will. We do not believe this proposal will substantially alter the overall character of this area. Development of an alley lot also tends to have a more limited impact on sort of the observable neighborhood character than developing on a standard lot would that fronts out on a public street. And as of the writing of this report, we did not receive any comments from adjoining properties. So for all of these reasons, we feel C is supported. Criterion D, the variance would adversely affect delivery of governmental services. So as you probably noticed in the staff report, there were some comments from our engineering, from our city engineer, as well as from our police chief. So I'd just like to go through those for a moment. So the engineering division, they've commented that water and sanitary sewer utilities are not available adjacent to the site, and they asked for additional information about utility connections consistent with city specs. So this is a comment that is more typical of our building permit process. So while the question of possible utility connections, it's certainly a relevant one with respect to actually developing this lot. We've carefully considered this comment, and our conclusion is that there really isn't a nexus. That's a term that we planners often use. There isn't really a rational nexus between establishing a utility connection to this lot and the provision for greater coverage or front yard parking as far as affecting utility service feasibility. And of course, at the building permit stage, the applicant's going to need to show how those utilities are going to be hooked up or extended. And the applicant could probably speak to this a little bit better than I could. But basically, they're probably going to have to run those new utility lines down one of those alleys to access the mains that are either on North Campus or on East Withrow, where the utilities are located presently. Turning now to the police chief's concerns on accessibility. I did have a chat with the police chief. He has a comment in there about there being kind of some murkiness or some problems in terms of how to apply the parking code in a situation where somebody may block that driveway to 116 and impede access into that area. Our conclusion out of that conversation is that could probably be mitigated with appropriate signage, something that says like "Do not block drive," and that way, if somebody does park there and they can't resolve it between the tenants of both properties or between owners, if they can't resolve it privately, if that sign in fact does exist there and the police get called, then they can actually do something about it at that point, because there is a provision in our parking code that allows for vehicles to be towed. Hopefully it wouldn't come to that. Hopefully they could just find the person who may have parked the vehicle there and get them to move it. But it would give them the ability to actually intervene in case that sort of situation did arise by having that signage there. With regard to the concerns that the chief has expressed on accessibility, we actually believe the situation can be further alleviated per commentary that is actually associated with criterion H. But just to stay on D for now, we do not believe providing additional lot coverage and front yard parking is going to have a more negative effect on governmental services that would be or could be provided as a result of that than if the site were forced into complying with the normal standards per the code. And I'll get to criterion H, of course, in a moment. But going to letter E, whether the property owner purchased the property with knowledge of the zoning restriction. So the applicant states that the owner is aware of his right to develop the parcel and is also aware of the parking requirements. So this sort of implies the owner did do his due diligence prior to purchasing the property, according to the auditors in February 2020. So this criterion is written to provide additional support for somebody who maybe wasn't aware of the restrictions when they purchased the property, or were aware of the current restrictions when they purchased it, and then the restrictions actually changed later. So for these reasons, we don't believe E supports the granting of the variance. Letter F, whether the predicament feasibly can be obviated through some method other than a variance. The development of this alley lot is not as straightforward as development of other alley lots has been. We really see that there's two predicaments involved in this situation. The first one is establishing a single family use under the rights of the code. And the second one, the more complex one probably, is maintaining the sufficient access to the back portion of 116 East Withrow. So the dwelling is proposed to be situated squarely within that buildable area, as I talked about when I had the rendering up. leaving much of the excess property to be used for parking and access within that front yard. The existing stone wall, the shrubs, there's a fairly large tree there at the end of the wall, and the utility pole that exists there, they all kind of impede the creation of a new direct connection into 116 from the western alley. So instead of disturbing this area, the applicant is proposing an access drive and has offered voluntarily to establish a shared access easement to ensure that that runs with the two properties, regardless of any ownership changes that may happen in the future. And staff is in agreement. This is probably the likely the most financially and topographically feasible option that they could pursue. So for those reasons, we feel F supports the variance. Letter G, whether the spirit and intent behind the zoning would be observed and substantial justice done. So the spirit and intent behind lot coverage is to ensure adequate provision of open and green spaces interspersed throughout properties, avoiding an abundance of paved surfaces and building foundations within the neighborhood. We believe that the applicant has attempted to design a site plan that aligns as closely as possible to the spirit and intent, trying to keep that lot coverage percentage down as low as they can get it, while still achieving all the access that they need, pedestrian and vehicular wise. However, as will be discussed with letter H, the goal of greater accessibility may outweigh the goal of not exceeding the coverage allowance. So speaking about criterion H, any other relevant factor, we feel there are other relevant factors to consider here that would support the variance. So our opinion is that the site could actually benefit from additional coverage above what has been requested, so that that proposed access drive can more adequately accommodate the maneuvering of vehicles in and out of that site. And I'm actually going to turn back to the site plan as I talk about this. So you can see here that the kind of the radius that's there and then the limited amount of pavement. I mean, this would be probably pretty difficult, especially if you were going north on that alley and wanted to make kind of a U-turn into 116. That would be pretty difficult to do with a vehicle of pretty much any size. You'd probably have to go forward and then maybe back up into it. It'd really be easiest to come at it from the south. So coming from the south is a lot easier. So you're making that left-hand turning movement and then sort of turning back to the right to get back into the back here. And what we often see sometimes when there's, very sharp corners of pavement where there's grass that's there at the corner, wheels can kind of clip those edges and leave ruts in the grass. So, the area along here, or even the area along here could probably start to develop that kind of condition. And that isn't always the best thing when that results. We feel accessibility and usability in this particular instance. Again, it's great that we always consider these variances on a case-by-case basis. We feel that the accessibility can be greatly improved by expanding the coverage area that is directly in front of the structure. And this could be done in a manner to kind of enhance the property and not just have sort of a blank expanse of concrete, but maybe using, dressing it up a little bit, maybe using pavers, alternative materials that kind of help create maybe more of a shared courtyard feel for, both pedestrians and vehicles, almost sort of a, front courtyard type of area. And expanding the coverage, maybe it goes all the way out to the sidewalk and you kind of delineate it either by, doing some kind of staining or again, using different materials in a creative way that kind of enhances the appearance of the site. So we really feel that there should be additional coverage, at least within this area right here. So that way vehicles that are coming from that sort of northern approach that are going to make a sort of a left-hand turn into that drive, to give them just a little bit of extra room so that when they make that turn, that they're not driving over, grassy areas that would eventually just become, mud. So that's the relevant factor that we feel needs to be expressed. And I'm going to go back to the decision criteria slide. I think with letter H, that's the last one. So that pretty much concludes my presentation. There's a lot going on with this one, so I'm happy to take any questions from the board that you may have.
Thank you, Zach. Board members, do you have any questions for Zach?
Yes, I do.
Go ahead, Roger.
And this comes from comment from a citizen to me. I want it just on the record. I think you've done a very good job of explaining the lot and the way that's allowed, but I want it on the record. I want my question on the record. This is by Oxford code, zoning, regulations, and rules, a buildable lot, period. The only thing we're being asked to do is this design fit within variances that we will allow for the spaces required? Is that correct?
That is correct.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Roger. Chris, go ahead.
Okay, in your presentation, Zach, you talked about 5% and 25%. Could you explain the 25% again? Because I was looking at the lot coverage on that slide you just had up. And if you take away the circular drive, the lot coverage drops to 20%, which would make it not an issue. And it seems wrong to penalize the owner for trying to preserve the tree and do the grade issues and so on. So be interested to know if that 25% is applicable here.
Do you recall which slide that 25% was on, Mr. Allison?
When you were I can see if I can find it. It was when you were talking about the, let's see.
Maximum front yard coverage.
Yes. Yeah, that when you were talking about the front yard coverage, you said that the design with an alleyway limits you to 5% with the idea that that's just a walkway. But in another instance, a lot on an alley would come to 25%. I don't know if I can find that.
I do see here in the report, 25% is the maximum front yard coverage if it's a standard frontage lot.
Okay.
Without access to an alley. So, and the reason for that higher limit is to allow for, not just the walkway leading to the building, but also a driveway. You're going to need to have access somewhere for the parking. That could be the 25% where that came in. As far as the, parking off of an alleyway in general, when an applicant is designing their plan to fulfill the minimum parking requirements per the use that they want to establish, take, for instance, we're talking about a single family here, so that's a minimum of 2. If there is an alleyway present, then they can have those parking spaces directly off of that alley. And then because that's not a front yard, the standard that talks about no more than 1 space in a front yard doesn't come into play. But just by nature of the lot and it's, the situation that we're dealing with here, there is no rear yard. The only access is from the alley. The alley is effectively serving as that front yard. Thus, there would be a variance to it.
Okay, would it be reasonable to if the east-west alley did not exist, they would fall within the 5% without the circular drive?
I think they would still be above the 5% just due to the parking spaces. But if you took the parking spaces and the drive away, they'd probably be within the limit of 5%. Pretty close.
Okay. So what I'm seeing is this, while this looks like a very substantial variance, when you get rid of the unusualness of an alley house, it's really not that far out of line, at least the way I'm looking at it. I do like the idea of feathering or putting an apron at the entrance and the exit to that circular drive, so that you aren't tearing up the yard without adding a substantial amount of additional coverage. So, is there some way that we would do that, or is that something that you do?
Well, I think the way that would be done, if the board was inclined to vote that way, you could simply increase the percentage amount that you would be granting above what has been requested by the applicant. And I have a percentage that I've calculated. The way I calculated it was to basically fill in the gap here.
Okay.
And I think that would bring it up to, that'd be an additional 241 square feet. So that would bring it up to 49.1% for the overall coverage. So it would go from the 43.2 to the 49%.
Okay.
But
And
that's,
again, I think it's wrong for us
yeah,
for the owner to be penalized for being generous with the next door neighbor. So that's my thought.
Chris, I tend to agree with you that we could grant the variance with condition that it could go to a maximum 49.1%. I don't know that we have to require it, but we could grant that condition.
Okay, that sounds good.
Any
That's all
other
my
board-
questions.
Okay, thank you, Chris. Thanks, Zach. Any other board members have questions for Zach?
I got a question.
Go
I have
ahead.
more than one. One
Go.
is, for one question is we're looking at 3 variances, right?
correct.
So do we vote on all 3 variances? Is it one package, or can we vote on yes on one and no on another, or like how's that work?
I've thought about that, and yes, we can do it as a package if that's more expedient, or we can do it individually, or do 2 and 1, whatever is going to work for the board. When we get to the point of discussion and vote, I'll bring that up then.
Okay. And then, so I'm back on lot coverage, Zach, also percentages. So on the total lot coverage, well, the front yard is that 5%. The front yard coverage requirement is 5%, and they're asking for 33.9%. Is that right?
That's right.
And then the total, I don't know what the total lot and the parking space in the front yard lot percentages are. Can you divide those up?
Yeah, the total lot coverage, the standard is 40%. They're requesting 43.2.
Okay,
And the parking would just go from 1 to 2. So the code allows for 1 parking space in this red outlined area. So
okay.
really the only way to achieve parking in a manner that is compliant with the code would be to do a driveway and have a stacked space in the area past the red line. So to do like a single wide driveway and do stacked spaces.
Okay, so the math, this is where my math is funny because the total, I think you said, is only 3.2% more. You said the variance is not substantial. I guess all 3 variances are not substantial because the total is only 3.2% more, even though the front yard variance goes from 5% to 33.9%. So how does that work?
Yeah, so if we talk about the total lot coverage first, so what that's observing is if you look to my slide, so it's everything that is in color here is coverage. And we take
Okay.
that overall coverage square footage as a percentage of the total lot, and that gets you the overall percentage, which is at 43.
Okay, and that's only 3.2% more than that
Correct.
requirement.
So on the face of just looking at percentages going from 40 to 43.2, we don't believe that's substantial.
Okay.
Finding with that one.
Okay. I think that clarifies that, although now I have a really it sounds like a silly question, but it seems like an obvious one too. The third variance is requesting more than one parking space in the front yard. Why do they need more than one parking space? If one parking space in the front yard is what's required, why don't we say they just have to have one parking space? Because that's where there's a lot of coverage. That is the increase from 5% to 33.9%.
Yeah, so the first thing there is for a new single family, the minimum number of spaces is 2. So if
Okay.
you were to say, we're only putting one parking space in the front yard, yes, that would comply with that provision, but it'd be another variance request. You'd be trading it for another request to vary the minimum parking from 2 to 1. So
Okay, got it.
rather than cutting down the amount of parking, they would rather provide the ample number of spaces, but do it in the front yard. So they're requesting the variance to the front yard, which is
Okay,
only,
so another option, they could put one in the front yard and one parking space someplace else. I don't know where, but that would,
yes, it'd
that
be
would,
anywhere other than the area that's in red here. So it'd have to be, like if you pretended hypothetically that this access drive wasn't needed or wasn't here, they could
right,
put a driveway through and do one space here and then one space here, and then that would
Yeah.
comply with the requirement.
okay.
With both requirements for 2 spaces and for no more than 1 in the front yard. That makes sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. So they need, by one code, they need 2 parking spaces, but by another code, they can only put only one in the front yard.
Right.
So
Right.
they need 2. Okay. All right, I think that clarifies it. I don't know what to do with Chris's suggestion.
That take care of it?
Yep, that takes care of it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other board members have a question for Chris? Chris, Zach, Zach, I've got a question for you on our discussion with the courtyard area and increasing that percentage from, what was it, 46 to 49%. Can you point out for us which section that would be applicable to? Total lot coverage or front yard or parking spot in the front yard? I'm just looking down the road so that if we want to allow an increased maximum in our motion, that we apply it to the correct section.
Gotcha. Yes, I can provide some clarity to that. So I'll go to the total coverage slide. So if you were to allow for additional coverage to fill the gap between area 1 and area 2, staying within the front yard setback, that would increase your coverage from 43.2 to 49.1%. If you looked at it from a front yard coverage perspective, that would be an increase from 33.9 to 45.09%. So if the applicant was in agreement with it and if the board wanted to go that direction, you could condition the approval in that manner to say we grant the requested coverage variance, and then we further grant the ability to have coverage between, you could reference the staff presentation if you would like, between features 1 and 2 in only this area here, in terms of how that would then affect, the total lot coverage and the front yard coverage standards. It would affect both of those in that way. So you could acknowledge that in that manner without getting specific into the percentages if you would like.
Very good. Thank you. Board members, did you catch all that?
No, I need more clarity. So I see between 1 and 2, the suggestion is to pave that, to allow lot coverage to pave that. Is that correct?
Yes. The reason I brought that up is that Zach had some comments about difficulty of getting vehicles in and out of that area, and increasing the paved area would make it a little easier. The applicant has requested what has been presented so far. But because of Zach's comment, I want to at least consider the opportunity to let the owner have more than what he's actually requested. Not
Yeah.
necessarily to demand that he do it, but to allow that it be a possibility if he chooses. That makes
And
sense?
that would not solve my problem. That could not become another parking space. The
No.
theory there is it would just widen that circle driveway kind of, right?
You are correct.
Okay, got it.
You are correct. Zach, thanks for that.
It will become another parking place.
Zach, do you feel
What
that
do you mean
there's Zach, do you feel there's enough room there to actually have it become a parking space?
Well, I think, unless you put proper signage in place, or you develop it in a manner where it's clear that that's not intended for parking, you could kind of mitigate that effect that may result there. That's not to say that they may use it on a temporary basis for like move in, loading or unloading or something of that nature. As long as they weren't blocking in that driveway to 116. And that could be something that could maybe be worked out between staff and the applicant later on. Or actually, what I might suggest, Mr. Chairman, is we hear from the applicant first, and then maybe decide from there where we might want to go in terms of whether we look at additional coverage or not additional coverage in terms of what is presented.
Sounds good. Thank you, Zach. Any other board members have a question for Zach? Okay, no more questions. Zach, thank you. As always, great presentation. Scott, are you going to be presenting for the applicant? You get unmuted there, Scott.
Yes. I am.
There you go. State your name and title for the record, please.
Scott Webb, I'm an architect and the applicant representing the owners this evening.
And would you raise your right hand for me, please? Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth in matters before this board?
I do.
Please proceed.
Thank you. Zach, if I could maybe use your site plan, that would be helpful. So let's just start with this one, and maybe I can try to shed some light on this for Mr. Benair. Our building standards for the front yard lot coverage are broken down into two ways. They are assuming that it's a lot on the street, and if it's a lot on the street, if it doesn't need a driveway, then you only need 5% lot coverage. If it needs a driveway, then you get up to 25% coverage. This particular alley lot doesn't really fit either of those definitions. It doesn't have the street frontage, but it does have alley frontage. In this case, our alley is our street. So, we're kind of in a catch-22 here, so to speak, as that goes, that, on first blush, because the parking is accessed from the alley, we are dumped into the lesser lot coverage restriction. But the fact that we're treating this not only as a street, but actually a corner lot in this particular case, that standard doesn't quite apply in exactly the same way. So primarily the front yard lot coverage issue is part of its math. I think if we were to look at it, more similar to other properties, that have access from the street, we're really comparing the 30%, whatever that next slide says, the front yard lot coverage is really more comparable to the 25%, which would be normal. And then to Chris Allison's point, were we not providing access to another property, we would probably just simply meet it. Therein lies the practical difficulty. We're guaranteed the ability to build a single family house here. We are considered a corner lot on the two alleys, meaning we have 2 front yard setbacks and 2 side yard setbacks, no rear to put a car in. or anything like that. So as a percentage of our lot, the front yard is a huge percentage of a very small lot when it wraps around the corner like this. So that's what's limiting both our locations to put our parking and also puts us into this lot coverage question. So to sort of reiterate what Zach said, we want to keep the shrubs and the retaining wall and the tree, and we've sort of designed this around it. It's not just a factor of being convenient. There's just simply too much grade going on there. If you were to try to turn into this lot ahead of that tree, you'd be traversing about 30 to 40 inches of grade there, and it would just simply not be possible to do that. I mean, that would be too steep of a turn. You would bottom out the car. So that wall that we're talking about in that tree is really not just decorative. It's actually functional. It's holding the alley up above the level of the parking lot. So there's that. While we have this slide up, if you can kind of look just to the left of the tree and you see the numbers N0204. Even though our alleys have a 16.5-foot right of way, that entire 16.5 feet is not paved. That line that you're kind of seeing there to the left of the tree is actually the paving line. So we do have the opportunity to fan this out once we're beyond the property. It looks right now like you'd have to make literally a right angle turn. That's won't effectively be the case because the paving that we'll provide will have to come out and meet the paving of the alley. And so we can certainly feather and widen it, once we're in the city right of way at that point. So that would help that somewhat. I think to the point about increasing the lot coverage, I think that Mr. Haseman makes a good point there that if it looks like parking, people are going to park in it. If it looks like grass, they might park in it. So, I think that is a danger because we want to provide this access to the southern lot. I'm certainly in favor of giving us some more elbow room, so to speak, in terms of turning radiuses and things like that. I'm honestly less inclined to pave the entire front yard just for fear that it would end up causing more problems than it would solve. I think it would be harder to delineate the access point, harder to put signage there. It's going to look like a parking lot. We're going to have a sign up that says no parking. I think it just seems kind of complicated. So while I appreciate the effort, and I think we could definitely use some more square footage, to feather those turns and maybe give a little more wheel room, so to speak. I'm less inclined to want to pave that entire front yard just because, like I said, I think it's probably going to create more problems than it's actually going to solve. So, we're thinking if we keep some version of what we have now, it'd be a good opportunity to maybe get another tree in there to create a little separation, a little foundation planting around the building, sort of soften it and make it very evident that this is a driveway for the neighbor and not for you who live in this house and decide it's a good place to park today. So, that's kind of what I have to say on that one. Sort of in big picture stuff, as Kate knows and as Zach pointed out, this is in the area of the Mile Square, not specifically the zoning district, but it's in the area of the Mile Square. The Planning Commission and City Council have targeted for additional density, upzoning a lot of it to R3, creating opportunities for accessory dwelling units. Even if this weren't a separate lot, City Council and Planning have looked at being able to put accessory dwelling units in the back of these unused portions of these lots. This one is just simply a big gravel lot right now. Once everything that is not colored on this map turns into green space, it'll be a huge improvement, I believe, in the amount of green space and the overall look of the alley in there overall. So check my notes here. I think our lot coverage, is limited, is affected by just the size of the lot. We have this exception that says you could go down to a 3,000 square foot lot, even though the minimum is 5,000. But the percentage of lot coverage matters. I mean, the house, honestly, even if as the lot gets smaller, the house doesn't necessarily get that much smaller. Bathrooms don't get smaller, doors, kitchens, things like that are sort of fixed. Parking spaces don't get smaller. So in between the 5,000 minimum lot size with a 45% or 40% lot coverage and a 4,000 square foot lot with a 40% lot coverage, I think that kind of accounts for part of the practical difficulty here in exceeding these lot coverage restrictions. Lastly, with regard to the parking space in the front yard, as I pointed out, we have nothing but front yard here. We have 2 front yards and 2 side yards. We also have requirements that parking spaces be a minimum of 3 feet off of any property line. Parking space is 9 feet wide. And it has to be 3 feet off the building. So 9 feet plus 3 feet off the property line and 3 feet off the building. If I were to try to tuck something into the side yard, it pushes my side yard up into 15 feet instead of 7.5 feet. That significantly limits the buildable footprint of the building at that point. So this is a variance that on corner lots, we've certainly approved lots of times. I think Board of Zoning Appeals has recognized that, if all you have are corner lots, that's where you need to put your parking. And as Zach pointed out, if we were just simply developing the front lot, the southern lot, we could fill this entire thing with parking down here, and it wouldn't even be considered a front yard at that point. So I think we've done a pretty good job going through all of this. I certainly appreciate staff's work in going through the decision criteria. In the end, because of the practical difficulty, the size, the grade, and providing access to the neighbor, we don't feel that these variances are substantial. In fact, I think staff has kind of pointed out, I've literally done the minimum that I could do to accommodate all of these criteria. We feel that it's an improvement to the neighborhood and it aligns with the goals of the comp plan and also Planning Commission and City Council in their search for density in this quad of the mile square where we want students to live. So I appreciate your consideration and be happy to answer any other questions you may have.
Thank you, Scott. Board members, any questions for Scott? No questions. Thanks, Scott. We need a motion to reconvene the regular session. Board
Mr.
members?
Chair, if I may, it looks like we have one attendee that is joining by phone. I'm not sure, that might be the property owner. But just in case it isn't, for the one person who is joining us tonight by phone, if you could dial *9 on your phone to raise your hand and let us know whether you'd like to speak. And the hand has not been raised, so I'm guessing it's probably the property owner who's joining us.
I believe that's his phone number. Yes.
Okay.
Yep. He just texted me and says it's him and he's good.
Okay.
All right.
I just wanted to make sure it wasn't somebody from the public. So sorry for interrupting, Mr. Chairman.
Not a problem. The joys of virtual meetings. Okay, board members, I need a motion to reconvene your regular session.
So moved.
Thank you, Roger. Is there a second?
Second.
Ms. Raminier seconds. Any opposition? Without opposition, we're back in regular session, which is open to discussion or a motion. Before we begin that, Kate brought up a good point. We've got 3 variances requested. We can consider those as a package and vote to approve or deny that as a package, or we can address them individually. So I guess my question to the board at this point, is there any one of these variances that a board member would be opposed to granting? In other words, denying a variance? Okay, then probably.
I'll just speak to that. No, originally, am I good? Can you hear me?
Yeah, you're good.
Yeah, my internet's in and out. Originally, I thought I would not want to vote for one of them, but between staff and the owner, I've gotten a better understanding of how this funny little piece of land work. So I'm fine with doing it all together.
Great, thank you. With that in mind, do we want to go through decision standards or is there a motion? Okay, let me get back up to the decision standards real quickly on my other screen. Too many screens. As we look through these, we've got 8 different standards, and just at a glance, we've only got one where staff has not recommended it as supporting a variance, and that is criterion E, whether the owner purchased the property with the knowledge of the zoning restriction. To me, that's a fairly minor situation overall. I think staff and Scott have done a great job of addressing the uniqueness of the lot and why they have come to the conclusions that they have in requesting these variances. If you go back to criterion A, just that alone, with total lot coverage being only criterion B, whether it's substantial, a 3.2% increase is not a substantial variance. That kind of falls in line with some of the other criterion through this. Any board member have a comment on any of these that really jumps out to them?
Yeah.
Go ahead, Roger.
I want to go back to a comment that Scott made, and I appreciate it, Scott. You brought something that I think is going to be very important in the process of building. If we would allow or even recommend to move on up between piece 1 and piece 2 on the diagram, I think you're right. I think it turns into a parking lot, and I would not like to see that happen. Using a little bit more maybe to feather out the driveway makes a lot of sense, but I would rather see it as written and not expand it into that other area because of the created problems that you addressed.
Thank you, Roger. I have to agree with you. And Zach made a good comment earlier about let's see what the applicant has to say. And I appreciate Scott's honesty, saying there's another way around it and being very honest about it becoming another parking spot and therefore also blocking the access to the adjacent property. So, we were
I
looking
didn't consider that when Zach was talking.
Yeah. So we were looking to solve a problem that didn't exist, sounds like. So Scott did a good job of pointing out that it really wasn't necessary and they'd like to stick to it as proposed. Any other staff member or board member have a comment on any of this?
No.
I have a question about the engineer and the police chief's comment. It sounds like the engineer's recommendation, according to Zach, will be addressed in the building development.
Yes.
And the police chief issue, I don't know. I mean, that's kind of what Scott was talking about bringing the driveway more out into the alley, or is that, how could that issue be resolved?
Well, again, you're going to have a problem that's going to need resolution. That's not really going to be part of our decision criteria. They have means with signage and cooperation between the two properties, especially since they're owned by the same owner, that they can solve their own problems. And you are exactly correct about the utilities. That is part of the building permit process, and that's a portion of that. It's not a portion of our consideration here tonight.
Got it. Good.
Dan,
Well,
you look like you got to say something, Dan.
yes, I do. It'd be nice if they could put house numbers on these properties.
They do.
Would be a plus.
They don't have them on the front house. Maybe they could put them on both houses at the same time. That way the police department and fire department may be able to find them better.
Right. Well, that's up to the owner. They can take care of that. And again, it's not part of our purview on these variances tonight, but good idea. I agree with you. So anybody else have anything from board? Then can I get a motion? Go ahead, Roger.
In case BZA 2020-10, involving the three variances requested. Variance section 114309C4B1, total lot coverage, 114309C4B3, front yard coverage, section 114904A1 for more than one parking spot in the front yard. I move that we grant all three variances based on the criteria supporting criteria A. Since it is an undeveloped lot, gives them a economic base for that lot. Criterion C, it does not affect the overall character of the neighborhood. Criterion D, it does not affect the delivery of government services. Section E, since it's a vacant lot, there's not a lot of income coming off of it, so it's not economically viable. Criterion G, the spirit of zoning would be observed. Other relevant factors, I think it would improve the neighborhood.
Thank you, Roger. Is there a second?
I so move.
Thank you, Dan. Roll call, Mr. Mazer.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Schnipper. I'll start with Mr. Allison, please.
Yes.
Mr. Hazeman,
Yes.
Ms. Rumanier,
Yes.
Mr. Ames,
Yes.
and Mr. Schnipper.
Yes. The motion carries 5-0. The variances, plural, are granted. Is there any new business that needs to be brought up before the board this evening from staff or board members?
No new business.
Okay. Zach, I was going to ask you, but last time Scott was nice enough to let us know he had 2 cases coming up this next month. So Scott, we got one for November. Thanks, Scott. Old business, Mr. Mazer, I had asked about House Bill 197 being extended. Do you have any update on that?
Great question. So the OMAA, the lobbying agency for municipalities, is in discussions with the state legislature to see if that's going to be extended. Talks are ongoing right now. As of right now, there has been no extension, so it's still set to expire. But we'll keep you updated. Hopefully we have an extension, at least allowing us that opportunity or option.
Great. Thank you, sir. Zach Moore, you had made a comment earlier about council considering hybrid meetings. Do you have any update on that?
I don't believe there is an update on that. Actually, I might correct that statement to say I don't believe we will be going down that path of doing hybrid meetings. I don't believe that is in the foreseeable future. I guess I'll leave it at that.
Okay. Well, with everything that's going on, personally, I hope that 197 would be extended. With everything that's being said about the potential case increases, even though this is a bit more lengthy, a bit more involved, I think that the safety factor of it outweighs the others, and I would prefer to see 197 extended. So, any other board members have a comment before we go for adjournment?
Well, when is 197 supposed to end?
End of the year.
End of the year. Okay.
Yep.
And did Scott say we do have a business in November or no?
Yeah, Scott told us we do.
We do. Okay. All right.
Stay tuned.
Indeed. Okay. How about a motion to adjourn?
I move to adjourn.
Thank you, Mr. Rumanier. Is there a second? Thank you, Roger. Any opposition to adjournment? The meeting is adjourned. Thank you for your time and effort this evening, everybody.
Thank
Good
you.
night.
Thanks.
Good night.